Our next speaker is Tyler Valiquette. He's the Associate Director for Future Majority, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to really amplify the voices of youth and young Canadians so that every candidate, politician, and party becomes an advocate for youth priorities. The young Canadians make up the largest voting bloc in Canada, representing approximately 40% of the electorate. And Future Majority really strives to make sure that all the politicians understand that, they shouldn't be ignoring the youth voice, either from a moral perspective or from a practical electoral perspective. When politicians, leaders, candidates, and policies reflect the priorities of young Canadians, millions more of youth will become engaged in the democratic process. And a lot of the challenges that we're addressing on this and other platforms and programs would be solved much quicker. Tyler, please, we'd love to hear your thoughts today.
Thank you, Yusuf. Yes, hi everyone, my name is Tyler. I am the Associate Director of Future Majority. I'm an organizer, I'm an activist. I've been involved in politics for most of my life, it seems like. And I'm really excited today to talk to folks about the power of young people and organizing, and share a little bit more about Future Majority and the work that we're doing. So thank you for having me. So I think right now, politicians in Canada think that they can ignore young people. They think that we don't necessarily have a lot of power, that we're not really engaged. But what Future Majority is trying to do over the next 4 years is really show every politician and party in our country that ignoring young people is really, will be at their own sort of peril. So as Yusuf said, when politicians pay attention to young people and the concerns of young people, we see the issues that we care about, like the climate crisis, racial equity, mental health, affordability. We see these issues really amplified and addressed by the parties, but it also, as they start to address those issues, more and more young people will enter the political process and the democratic process, reinforcing those politicians to address those issues. So I'd like to pose a little bit of a question as to why do you think politicians think that they can ignore young people? Well, there's this thing called a negative feedback loop. In Future Majority, we're really trying to break this negative feedback loop. So right now, politicians, they prioritize the concerns of older voters, older generations. And as a result, young people participate less in the democratic process. They vote less, as an example. What we're trying to do is break that negative feedback loop by bringing more young people into the political process. Therefore, politicians will begin to prioritize their concerns, address those issues, and reinforce more young people to get involved. As a result, we'll break that negative feedback loop, and we'll start to see our concerns like climate change and racial equity talked about more often and actually addressed in policy. As Yusuf mentioned, millennials and Gen Zs now represent the largest voting bloc in our country. They represent roughly 40% of the electorate. And that means that's a huge opportunity. That means that we have a tremendous amount of power to actually create change in our country. And we know that our generations are united on the issues. 90% of young people want to see our government take a more bold approach to solving the climate crisis. So the more that we talk about it, the more that we are able to amplify our concerns to politicians, the more they'll realize the amount of power that young people have. Now, Future Majority, we are very strategic in the way that we organize. We know we're never going to have as much money as the oil and gas industry to pay for fancy, expensive lobbyists to be going to Ottawa and protecting that sector. We're never going to have as much money as them. But what we do have is people power. And what we also have, and what we also do effectively at Future Majority, is organizing in the places that matter most to politicians and building that people power in those places. So Future Majority, we really focus our efforts on organizing in strategic ridings where the margin of victory between the top two parties is really narrow. So we organize in ridings where an election is typically decided by 1,000 votes or less, and that have a college and university campus. That means there's a lot of young people there who are easy to access. So the idea is, if we're organizing in these strategic ridings that are decided by small vote margins, it'll be very easy to get the attention of politicians. So imagine you're in Peterborough, where the last election was decided by a very small vote margin, and you're a candidate running for an election, and you look at Trent University, and you know the election's only going to come down to a couple hundred votes. You look at the Trent University campus, there's thousands of students who have pledged to vote, thousands of students who are engaged. What are you going to do? You're going to reach out to them, you're going to talk to them, and you're going to listen to their concerns. And then young people will show up in record numbers to vote, and we can hold those politicians accountable to the promises that they make to us during the election. So we're very strategic in the way that we organize and where we choose to organize. We also see that the greatest potential in mobilizing young Canadians are the Canadians who are passionate about political issues and social issues, but don't necessarily see the democratic process or participating in the democratic process as a way to make change. So when you're thinking about millennials and Gen Zs, about 35% of that demographic fit into what we call active support. That's probably everyone in this room. That means people who are passionate about social and environmental issues, who are involved in their communities, involved with an NGO, or who are actively voting and participating in the democratic process. So 35% of millennials and Gen Zs fall into that category. Great. Who we're focusing on are the 55% of millennials and Gen Zs who are classified as passive support. That means that they're passionate about environmental and social issues, but they don't necessarily see voting or participating in democracy as a means to create change. So we focus our effort on engaging those people, bringing them into the democratic process and getting them involved in organizing for climate change or other social issues, because we know the active support, they're going to show up, they're going to vote, they're going to continue to create change. Now, we've been able to test sort of these strategies in our organizing efforts for a couple of years now. We're a new organization. We started just in 2019, just before that federal election. And we were able to hire 25 organizers to be in 25 ridings. We had 120,000 face-to-face conversations with young people about the issues that matter to them. And ultimately, we were able to build a network of 50,000 young people across the country, walk 26,000 of them to the polls, and build up a volunteer base of thousands of young people. And our organizing efforts paid off. We saw a 52% increase nationwide on the campuses where Future Majority organized versus where there wasn't a Future Majority organizer. So actively talking to young people and bringing them into the democratic process is effective. And in 2020, we continued organizing, but we focused more on advocacy efforts. And we had to do it digitally because of the pandemic. And we ran 30 green and just recovery town halls across the country, had over 25,000 people view our town halls, generated a lot of media coverage, had ministers, MPs, MPPs, mayors attend these town halls, and we were able to recruit and train 400 new volunteers, which is huge, continuing to build power in these target ridings. And we're starting to see through our election organizing and our advocacy programming, we're seeing the needle move on some of these key issues. In Thunder Bay with Minister Haidu, the Minister of Health, we were able to organize effectively to have her send a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau, urging him to investigate universal mental health care in Canada. With Minister Monsef in Peterborough, we were able to effectively organize around racial equity and have her strike a racial equity committee within the community to investigate those issues. And with Minister Wilkinson in British Columbia, we were able to organize to have him strike a youth council to inform the ministry on what youth want to see in terms of climate policy to address the climate crisis. So we're starting to see the needle move through our organizing work, which is really exciting for us and for our volunteers. As you know, There's an election just around the corner. We're on the eve of it being called, most likely this Sunday. And I think right now, a lot of Canadians probably don't want an election. They're very hesitant about having an election. And that's totally understandable. And I think there is a unique opportunity right now with this election because the issues of the election have yet to be defined. Young people can help define those issues. We can make sure that the climate crisis and racial equity and mental health and the issues that we care about are front and center in the conversations that are happening by doing effective organizing. And we can really make sure that we set the tone of the election to make sure conversations are happening about the things that we want them to be happening, to be talking about, and also set the tone for whoever forms the new government to be more bold on those issues that we care about. So despite this being a pandemic election, and a lot of hesitancy towards that and concern, there is a big opportunity, as in any election, to organize, to raise our voices, and to make sure that our concerns are being amplified and heard by politicians. And so we're going to continue to organize for this election, and we have a lot of really exciting goals set for both hybrid sort of digital and in-person election in our target ridings. We're going to continue to organize around climate change, mental health, affordability, and racial equity. So I think I've taken quite a bit of time, so I will stop talking, but it's, as I said earlier, it's great to be here, and I'm really excited to learn more from the other groups here as well.
Thank you so much, Tyler, and thank you for sharing the work that you guys are doing. It's so incredibly important to always remind ourselves that the electoral process is a key part of change. It's a key part of how we get to where we collectively want to be. There's many parts, and that's part of what we're trying to do at this event, is to highlight the intersectionality of the work being done, to see each other's programs, to better understand, and to better build programs together to help address these things. And what you guys are doing is awesome. It's appreciated. And again, thank you for that. And if there is most likely an upcoming election, I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about your guys' work.